Well, welcome back. You've just heard in the break how important it is to sleep. Well, I can guarantee you, if you've been working outside in the primary sector, you won't have any trouble sleeping as a worker. But in this segment, what we're going to talk about is how we actually get those Kiwis from town into the rural sector and keep them there. That's the real trick to the whole way we can redeploy New Zealanders. And so, what we've learned over the years as industry, it's not as simple as just putting an ad up and getting someone and giving them, whatever it is they need to do the job in the rural sector. A pair of pruning shears if they're going to do pruning, for milking, a quad bike, I suppose, or something like that. But how do we actually make that transition? And what we've learned is that's not easy. So I'd first like to turn to the Minister. The government's put together some amazing programs. There are taster courses, there's advertising starting, and just ask the Minister about some of the government stuff that's been done to really help us as industry get into this. And then we'll talk to the rest of the group about how we can latch onto that and make it really work. Minister.
Look, firstly, I guess if we're looking to attract people who might seek careers and they might start out, at basic level in industries, we've put $1.6 billion into trades and apprenticeship training package, and that's across our economy. It doesn't differentiate from one industry to another, so that's available for us if we put up the proposals. We've got Tauratahi up and running again. We've got Telford humming, and we'll support any other, and there are many other training establishments across the country. So we're doing as much as we can, as quick as we can. And look, as I said before, take the area of contracting where there's an acute need and close contact with the organisation, oversubscription to the courses that we're running, and many of the people are getting the skills necessary a lot faster than they thought. So look, there's no stone being left unturned to look at ways of getting those people. And I have a friend who's a helicopter pilot, very experienced, doing a course at Telford, thinks it's absolutely wonderful, and he'll be able to drive any machine after a 2-week course there that you put in front of him. These are capable people. Many across tourism have been driving vans, driving jet boats. They have an aptitude for this, and they can do it. And that applies, across all of the sectors. I think what we need to do is talk to the people who we awarded Good Employer awards in Parliament. And I think we need training courses for employers as much as we do for employees.
Yeah, just picking up that theme, Jeff, you had talked earlier in the first segment about the importance of the employers being as equipped as the people coming from town. Do you just want to cover what you believe the employers need to do to actually make sure that people coming from town can integrate into the rural sector?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. First of all, I just want to reiterate the point that we do have challenges getting the right people in the sector, and all sorts of jobs have challenges, and when people don't turn up, that throws you down to chaos. From a dairy farming point of view, if you've got 600 or 1,000 or 1,200 cows waiting at the milking shed to be milked, that just throws a whole lot of more chaos on a day that's already pretty busy to start with. So, this is not just good boss, it's good employee, it's good boss, it's everyone playing the game together and meeting the expectations that that each hold of each other in the employment relationship. And as far as our Go Dairy campaign goes, when we are working with MPI on that, one of our first parts of our course is actually a few days worth of actual realistic job previews that Dairy Training Limited are delivering, and it's actually just trying to let people know what living in a rural community is really like and what they can expect on the job, and letting them self-select as to whether they're up to it or not. And believe it or not, success for us is if somebody chooses not to do it because they just don't think they're cut out for it. What we do see is we see a lot of people going and giving dairying a go, but they are experimenting. So we see them go in and go out, and we're perhaps more visible in the dairy sector than some other sectors that are ensconced in an urban area somewhere. But all that aside, look, as bosses, we do need to step up to the plate. So Dairy NZ, with others, is running a Good Boss campaign, and that is really just trying to identify those issues that employers and employees are feeling are a bit challenging, and get farmers, leading farmers, telling each other their story about how they deal with those issues and get through it.
So, Surma, turning to the processes, I imagine work experience in the processes may be a little more tricky than it could be on a dairy farm or in an orchard. How is the processing industry going to deal with taster courses or giving people the experience and then the very critical skills to work in a meat processing plant?
Well, Mike, you do raise a very good question. It is rather complicated in the meat processing and exporting industry. And it is because the job itself, or many of the roles themselves, are very tough. Physically tough and demanding. It involves shift work. It also involves quite a lot of physical stamina and strength to do the work. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that classroom-based training, taster course type training doesn't really fit into our training model. Most of the work is learned on the job. We are probably New Zealand's biggest on-the-job trainers in terms of building up that skill set and expertise. And much of it is actually done by pairing up with skilled workers during the day and learning off one another until the new workers become productive enough to then take on that training mantle and move on to more productive work and move up the chain, so to speak. So the challenge for us is twofold. Firstly, is as some of you mentioned, is how do you attract those workers that may be living in urban areas? How do you attract them into a more regional or rural setting? How do you support them with relocation and establishing themselves in a situation which might be quite different to what they're used to? And then in the meat processing industry, the second fundamental challenge is how do you actually train those people on the job when we are struggling with skilled labour at the moment as it is. Some of the things that we've been thinking about is around having some support for pastoral care for new workers coming into the role, helping them to assimilate into communities, helping them establish networks and relationships. And then also on the job, looking at stepping up the train-the-trainer type system so that we have more skilled labourers, skilled workers coming in and willing to move away from their day-to-day job into more of a training and mentoring role to support the training pipeline of those new workers coming in. This is not something that can happen overnight, and certainly it is something that we're looking at working with government and with some of the training providers like Praito and hopefully the new Workforce Development Council that's currently being established to develop those systems in place to equip our trainers, our people to be able to do that on-the-job training. But it is challenging and it does take time. And unfortunately, a lot of our skilled labour at the moment that is willing to do that training is also migrant labour. And with the changes in immigration policies and what Jeff talked about earlier, that's squeezing the pipeline for training and onboarding new workers.
No, thank you. Jeff, I'd just like to explore this classroom versus on the job. And, if I'm an urban person and I don't particularly like classrooms, well, we've sort of got the perfect solution for you, because we're not really talking about classroom training here. As your career develops, well, there may be classroom work, but can you just cover how that on-the-job aspect goes, and perhaps lead into the government's revitalisation of apprenticeships, which, thank you, Minister, is well received, and how we can really capture that?
Yeah, absolutely. The dairy sector, like the meat sector, is very much, and hort and all the agricultural sectors in many respects, entry-level positions in particular, are very much learnt on the job as you're doing it. So we require the employer actually to take that as a really serious part of their job or their responsibility towards an employee. So to take the time and make the effort to train that person properly. I did mention earlier, in the dairy sector at least, it's great if you can actually employ people before it gets too busy, before you run out of time yourself to do that training, and before the pressure comes on and it just all gets too hard. So doing things like that, thinking a bit differently about how we employ and how we manage staff on farms is an important part of it. In terms of the off-job training, look, I think it's really important that we don't think about learning or training as we knew it at school or at university. It's a totally different case in point, and I just get hung up all the time with people who have got that mental model, when in actual fact what we're talking about is people on the job in a lot of time, most of the time, doing learning, but at times it is supported not necessarily by classroom, but by some off-the-job component that helps to standardise and helps people to sort of understand what's done in the industry beyond the farm that they are working on. So that's a really important part of getting quality, and it's also an important part of employers recognising qualifications and knowing what they're getting when they're employing somebody with a certificate from wherever. So that leads quite nicely into the apprenticeship scheme, which the Minister talked about. The apprenticeship scheme, in our sector at least, is probably a little bit more aimed towards people who've taken 6 months or a year to have a look at the industry and have decided that they are committed. But then it works people up to a point where they're actually able to manage a farm. And once again, most of that learning is done on the job, supported by some off-farm learning. But once again, assessment is done as you do your job. It's part of your daily chores. It's part of being able to run your farm effectively. It's really just implementing good practice in a lot of cases. So this whole phobia we have of learning, hopefully we can get over with the reforms of vocational education that are going on at the moment. But certainly the apprenticeship and the extra funding that's gone into the apprenticeship is a boon for many employers out there who will actually be able to use the money that's being put aside to perhaps employ some more casual staff or some other people to enable that pressure to be taken off, and some good investment made in that learning.
Well, in horticulture, it's very much the same as in dairy. The apprenticeship is exactly that. It's very hands-on. And I think even for people who are just coming for that taster, perhaps for that initial point of employment you're talking about, Jeff, the fact is you're not going to the classroom. If you like the outdoors and you like learning with your hands, which many of us do, when you think about it, you learnt a lot off your father or your mother in terms of what their jobs were by watching and repeating and doing. And this to me is a real attraction. As Jeff points out, we're not locked into the classroom. There may be some requirement as you go on and perhaps become an apprentice to get a little bit more theory, but it's really pragmatic, practical stuff. And I think for a lot of the New Zealanders who are looking at redeploying, this will be really attractive. So we absolutely need, Minister, and the attraction campaigns to get across that we're not talking about classrooms, we're actually talking about getting out there and using your hands and having one hell of a good time. So that sort of brings this segment to a close, but in the next segment, We want to talk about the question, do we have enough Kiwis for all these jobs? And if we don't, what we can do about that. But number one, we want to get every Kiwi a job in the primary sector. Thank you.